You've probably heard it a million times, right? Someone says the government's just printing more money to solve its problems. And it sounds so simple, almost like an economic cheat code. But the reality, well, it's way more complex, and honestly, pretty controversial. So today, we're going to unravel what that phrase actually means, why this whole thing started, and how it lit the fuse for a digital rebellion that could change the future of money as we know it. Okay, let's dive right in.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by busting the myth of the physical printing press. Then, we're going to jump in a time machine back to the Great Depression to see what the terrifying alternative looks like. From there, we'll look at the modern-day solutions central banks came up with, the public anger that it caused, and the pretty radical new technology that was born directly out of all that frustration. And finally, we'll ask, where do we go from here?
All right, let's kick things off by deconstructing the myth of the money printer. And to really get this, we have to look back. Because in the world of finance, the past, well, it's never really in the past.
And this quote, it just perfectly frames our whole story today. We're about to see this incredibly powerful cycle in action. A financial crisis happens, it sparks a really radical solution, and that solution, well, it creates a whole new set of problems. It's a pattern you'll see again and again.
So first things first, when you hear printing money, you've got to get that image of a giant machine just churning out $100 bills out of your head. In the modern world, it's a much more sophisticated policy called quantitative easing. You'll hear it called QE. So here's the gist. A country's central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the US, creates new money, but they do it digitally, with a few keystrokes, really. Then they use this new money to buy up financial assets, mostly government bonds, from big commercial banks. And this move is like a 1-2 punch. First, it jacks up the price of those assets, which pushes interest rates down for everybody, making it cheaper to borrow. Second, it swaps out those assets on the bank's books for fresh cash, basically pumping the whole financial system full of liquidity. The theory, anyway, is that these banks, now flush with cash, will be way more likely to lend to people and businesses, and that gets the economy going again.
But why would a central bank ever need a tool that powerful, that risky? To answer that, you have to look at what happens when the exact opposite happens. When money doesn't just stop flowing, but it actually starts to disappear. Take a look at this. Between 1929 and 1933, right in the thick of the Great Depression, the US money supply didn't just slow down, it collapsed. It shrank by almost a third. A full 31% of the money in the economy just vanished. A number like that is staggering, but it's what it does to real people that's truly terrifying. This shrinking of the money supply, what economists call deflation, is just absolutely devastating. Thousands of banks failed and people lost their entire life savings literally overnight. And of course, anyone who still had money was scared to death of losing it, so they pulled their cash out and stuffed it under the mattress. It created this vicious downward spiral. With no money moving, businesses failed, unemployment shot up to a staggering 25%, and the entire world was plunged into its darkest economic decade. Now, the memory of that kind of collapse, it haunted economists for generations. They swore they would never, ever let that happen again. And that brings us to the dramatic invention they cooked up to fight back.
And this wasn't just some theory in a textbook. It got its first real-world test in the 1990s. Japan's economy was stuck in what they call a deflationary trap after this massive bubble popped. To fight it, they became the very first country to try quantitative easing. Then, fast forward to 2008. The US housing market implodes, and it threatens to take the entire global financial system down with it. Well, the Federal Reserve took Japan's playbook and basically put it on steroids. They unleashed what some people called a money cannon to stop another Great Depression in its tracks.
So, the good news? It worked, kind of. The financial system didn't totally melt down. The bad news? The way they did it came with these enormous hidden costs, and it created this deep, simmering public anger that you can still feel today.
And this slide right here perfectly illustrates the problem. The solution wasn't just this fancy QE stuff. It was also just straight-up bailouts. The government took $700 billion of taxpayer money and used it to rescue the very same massive financial institutions whose reckless behavior caused the crisis in the first place. You know, while Wall Street bonuses came roaring back, Main Street was still dealing with foreclosures and job losses. The feeling was, profits are for the private banks, but the losses are for society to pay for. And all that anger boiled over into the Occupy Wall Street movement. Its iconic slogan, "We are the 99%, just perfectly captured this feeling that the whole system was rigged to protect the powerful at the expense of everybody else. But all that frustration didn't just lead to protests in a park. It also inspired a quiet, anonymous rebellion, a technological answer to a financial problem. You could say the very act of bailing out the banks directly triggered the invention of a whole new kind of money. Now this is where it gets really interesting. This is the proof. On January 3rd, 2009, just a few months after the bailouts, an anonymous creator, or maybe a group of creators, known as Satoshi Nakamoto, mined the very first block of Bitcoin. Encoded into that block, forever, was this headline from a British newspaper. This wasn't just a timestamp, it was a mission statement.
See, Bitcoin was designed as a direct response to all the problems we've been talking about. It's a currency with no central bank. There's no government that can just decide to print more of it. No bailouts. Its supply is fixed by math, hard-coded. It can never be changed. It was a real attempt to create a new form of hard money in a world of what seemed like infinite digital dollars.
And if you're wondering why this idea is still so powerful to so many people, just look at this number. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Between 2020 and 2022, in response to the economic crisis from the pandemic, 40%, let me say that again, 40% of all US dollars that have ever existed were created. Just poof! This massive expansion of the money supply is the exact scenario that Bitcoin was built to prevent.
And that all brings us to right now, to today, and to the fundamental fight that's happening at the very heart of our financial system. We are truly at a crossroads, and we're debating two totally different philosophies about what money even is. So what's the answer? On one hand, tools like quantitative easing seem like they're necessary to prevent another Great Depression. But on the other hand, does using them all the time slowly eat away at the value of our savings, reward bad behavior, and create this unstable system that's just totally dependent on constant bailouts? This is the central economic question of our time.
Which brings us right back to where we started, history. The legendary trader Jesse Livermore once said this, and it's a great reminder that markets just move in these cycles of fear and greed. This battle between government-controlled money and decentralized alternatives, it's just the latest chapter in a very, very old story. What happens next? Nobody knows for sure, but one thing is certain, it will happen again.